Let's take a look more in depth now at some of the issues that Michael Voss raised in his report. There, joining us here in Washington is the former Mexican ambassador to the United States, Arturo Sarukhan. He is a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution as well. Michael Shifter is with us from Panama. He's president of the Inter-American Dialogue, a U.S. Center for Policy Analysis on issues affecting the Western Hemisphere. Also joining us here in Washington is a Latin America and Caribbean policy analyst with the Center for Economic and Policy Research.Alexander Main. And with us from Havana is the Cuban diplomat and educator, Carlos Alzugaray. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Let's start in Havana with Dr. Alzugaray. Dr. Alzugaray, we have the United States and Cuba now sitting at the same table. That's the first time that's happened in almost 6 decades. How significant is that?
Very, very significant. It's a brand new ball game because both governments are talking to each other. It's not only the presidents who are talking to each other and signaling very clearly that they want to go ahead with discussions on every aspect of the relationship between Cuba and the United States. Cuba and the United States are neighbors. That's something that has almost been forgotten. And as neighbors, we have a lot of things that we have common interests and issues which we have to agree on how we deal with them, from protection of marine life to fighting counter narcotics to let's say filmmaking, whatever. I mean, the connection is big and potentially very important for both countries.
Ambassador, the attention, of course, at the summit will be focused on the United States and on Cuba. People will be looking at the optics, the body language, the tone, the language that's being used there. But there are other very important issues that the summit will have to address, right? Absolutely.
There's no doubt that the Cuba and U.S. process for diplomatic normalization has galvanized the attention of the hemisphere. It is one of the issues with which Latin America has traditionally looked at the United States. It is one of the issues that provides a prism for how Latin Americans engage with the United States. But there are many other issues which are critically important, probably even more important than the dynamics between two heads of state. They have to do with how we strengthen democratic governance throughout the Americas, how we take on the critical issues of transnational organized crime, which affect a very large swath of countries, including the US, how we deal with some of the very significant challenges of climate change. This is an area that has 4 or 5 of the most mega diverse countries on the face of the earth: Mexico, the US, Brazil. So dealing with harmonizing some of our policies on everything from energy to climate change is a very important issue.
That's a big task for the summit. Let's go to Michael Shifter in Panama. And Michael, when we look at the broad relationship between the United States and Latin America, would it be fair to say that it's pretty ambivalent right now? On the one hand, you've got the United States making this big reach out to Cuba. On the other hand, we just heard the United States single out Venezuela, impose sanctions on individuals in that country. Is this a bit of push and a bit of pull on the part of the United States?
Well, I think what you see is that some of the issues on the unfinished agenda of U.S.-Latin American relations that have been irritants for many decades, Cuba being the most important, but also drug policy and even immigration. I think to President Obama's credit, he's made some real progress. But at the same time, we see that there is a very profound divide still between Latin America and the United States, and that's illustrated by the Venezuela case. They're very different approaches. The United States has been very critical of human rights violations in Venezuela, whereas most of the region, for a variety of reasons that differ from country to country, have been pretty silent on what's happened in Venezuela, and the regional response has been tepid. So we see some basis for greater cooperation, for looking to the future, to addressing some of the issues mentioned by Arturo: democratic governance, climate change, trade, economic progress. But there are still some differences, and I think nothing demonstrates that more than the Venezuela case. There's been a really 2 different positions, and we'll see at this summit. I think the United States clearly is hoping that that gap will be narrowed a bit, but that remains to be seen.
Alex, besides the huge symbolism of the United States and Cuba being at the same table, What do you think will dominate the agenda at this summit? I mean, we have several very big American countries, South American countries. We have Argentina, Brazil, Chile to some extent. There are serious economic challenges in those countries.
No, absolutely. And it's interesting to see that, you know, Obama in this trip is spending his time in the Caribbean, and he's in Jamaica today. And of course, tomorrow he'll be in Panama. And in Panama, he'll be meeting with the SICA group of Central American countries. And of course, these are countries that have been suffering a lot economically, particularly since the financial crisis, the global crisis, and where the U.S. is saying that they're going to come to the region's assistance. And here, again, you're seeing the U.S. and Venezuela at loggerheads to a certain extent. The trip to Jamaica that Obama is making today, and he's meeting with CARICOM, so those are the heads of state of nearly every country of the Caribbean. A big part of the agenda is actually focused on energy security, and this was something that was launched by Vice President Biden over the summer. And part of this has to do with this perception that Venezuela's Petrocaribe agreement, which has been providing oil on preferential terms to the Caribbean and some of the Central America, that it's not a sustainable agreement, but also part of it, and this has been sort of clearly said, not so much from the administration, but from some of the analysts in Washington that are pushing for this energy security agenda. Petrocaribe is also depicted as a big political player in the region and displacing the U.S. Politically.
Dr. Alzugaray, getting back to Cuba's participation at the summit, what will Cuba hope to be walking away with from this summit? I mean, we do know that Cuba wants United States investment in the country, and we do know that Cuba wants to be taken off that list of nations that sponsor terrorism. We understand that that could happen. That's imminent. That could happen within hours. So what is the best case scenario for Cuba?
Well, the best scenario for Cuba is that we have a good summit, that this summit in which Cuba is going to participate for the first time is a positive summit. Of course, a lot has to be done. As has been pointed out, this row between Venezuela and the United States over something that is kind of a formulation of the way that the U.S. formulated its decision on Venezuela. I mean, it's kind of a mistake of the United States. So we have to build a new cooperative environment in Latin America and the Caribbean. The last two summits have not been that kind of cooperative environment. There has not even been a document. I don't expect that to happen in this summit, but I think what Cuba would like to contribute is to bring together Latin America and the Caribbean and the United States in a more cooperative environment, an environment that is more constructive, that takes into account the interests of every country. Cuba has interests. Cuba wants its reform process to be highlighted. As a matter of fact, the Minister of External Trade and Economic Cooperation and Investment is participating in the entrepreneurial summit, bringing with him a number of proposals and ideas about how other countries can contribute to this process of development in Cuba. Of course, we have a long way to go. A lot of issues have to be solved, so that would be the main ideas. Remember, Cuba was about a year ago, more than a year ago, the venue for the summit of CELAC. At that summit, one of the most important documents that was approved was a document proclaiming Latin America and the Caribbean a zone of peace. And I think that's, when we look at the world today, that's an important contribution, because what the Latin American Caribbean countries are signaling in diplomatic and political terms is that here we're going to work to solve our problems, and there is the peace process in Colombia is an example of what can be done, and that Cuba can contribute. I think this will reinforce and will consolidate the long road that has taken Cuba to come back to be part of the hemisphere in a cooperative way.
Okay, we are going to have to take a break right now. When we come back, more on the upcoming Summit of the Americas. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.